Okay, friends, here we are at lesson 38, and we are on the non-muscle pelvic floor self-check tracker. Okay, I've given a scenario here, and in this scenario, this person has a couple things going on. So she had a vaginal delivery, and in that vaginal delivery, she tore. But instead of tearing down towards the anus, she actually tore up. She tore all the way to the clitoral hood. So it involved her urethral area here all the way to the clitoris. And then she also has anal fissures. And so those are really tricky to treat sometimes. And that's around here. And that can create a lot of problems with scar tissue and bleeding and adhesions. So that's a little bit of her background. Now let's look at what her self-check tracker looks like. So her clitoral hood, it looked normal. No pain to light pressure, but pain to deep pressure. Insertion isn't relevant. She did have scar tissue. She did have restricted movement, and it was very sensitive. And when we moved her clitoral hood, there was actually pain in the bladder. These other three structures, everything looked good. The labia minora. So let's just do a real quick refresher of the labia minora. Those are the inner lips, okay? So the inner lips in there. The labia minora just looked kind of dry. The tissue was dry. There was pain with light pressure. There was pain with deep pressure. It's not applicable. You don't insert anything into the labia minora. There was scar tissue because she tore. There was restricted movement, and it was hypersensitive. And then very similar with actually the opening of the vagina. So when we're looking at the opening of the vagina, and then we're actually going to check inside the vagina too. So the opening of the vagina, dry, light pressure is painful, deep pressure is painful, difficult to insert anything into that opening. And there was scar tissue, there was restricted movement, and she was hypersensitive. And then actually going into the vaginal canal, dry vaginal canal, painful light pressure, painful deep pressure, unable to go deep. There wasn't any scar tissue inside. So her scar tissue was more on the outside and going upwards. There was restricted movement though, and hypersensitive. And then perineal body looked good. External anus. So there were fissure scars around the anus and scar tissue, restricted movement, and hypersensitive. So that's one example of what looking at the non-muscular structures could look like. Everyone's going to be different, but that gives you, I think, something to work with. And I didn't fill out every single square for every single structure. So if you're finding the structure and it looks fine and it's moving fine, you know, I mean, ideally, if you're doing a very detailed check, then you're going to check every box, whether it's yes, no, NA, whatever. But even if you just check, look, I know it's overwhelming. Even if you check one box on one row because you checked one thing, that's a win. That's more than you had done before. So celebrate it. Don't feel discouraged because it is a complex table. And like I mentioned before, you're checking things on yourself that it's highly unlikely that a provider has ever gone into that detail with all of those structures with you. And most providers just don't do that. They don't have the time, and that's a whole other webinar. All right, now let's move on. We're going to go and do the underactive non-muscle pelvic floor check.